So here we are on Canada Day. I'm at the US border right now, just trying to get in. A little bit of a line, but actually not that bad. I don't think I'll be here for more than 15 or 20 minutes. So anyways, we're just about to get across the border and looking forward to getting into the US, getting to the hotel and checking in. So far the drive's been a little bit busy on the roads, but not too bad overall. Well, we're here. We've done a bit of a track walk. It's been pretty good. Here's the type of digs you get when you're an amateur pro. Comfort Inn, Hazleton, Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes from the Tough Like RORR course. So we'll get up nice and early and head back over there. Everything's going well so far. We're all registered. Just waiting to go eat some supper and get ready for the morning. Hey, so what's going on, YouTube? Just wanted to do a bit of an update because if you were following me on Instagram and listened to any of my vlogs at the beginning of the season, you would have seen that we were planning on doing a couple of events down in the States this year, one of which being Tough Like RORR. So we went to Tough Like RORR. I will have some footage here, but this is going to be a pretty quick video. So just as way of an update, a few of us went down to Tough Like RORR in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Maybe not, though. Yeah, we participated in the event. Everybody I rode down with went into the B class. So not that it really mattered class-wise down there per se. It affected how you lined up and if you rode, at what time you rode during the day. But other than that, you had just as good a shot as anybody else to continue racing into the weekend through the different qualifiers and last chance qualifier, etc. Having said that, definitely there is a pretty big difference between classes, hard enduro wise, and what we have here in Ontario. So what I would say for, just quickly, for any of those who haven't ridden any hard enduro down in the States and might be thinking about it, one of the biggest things that I would pass on is their hard enduros are definitely no joke. Not that I think anybody ever thought that they were. I know for myself, I definitely overestimated my skill level, my conditioning. but as well underestimated just how hard their races are in the AMA Hard Enduro Series. So Tough Like RORR being, I think, one of the most difficult, although I can't speak from personal experience, definitely tested my conditioning and my skill to the absolute limit, like nothing that I've ever done before, like nowhere I have ever ridden before. And I only, and I'll get to it in a second, didn't even make it through the first day of qualifying for a couple of different reasons, not skill-based necessarily, but for a couple of different reasons. So the way the trip started out, we headed out, made the drive. It actually wasn't that far. So I'm, up near Ottawa. It was about a 7-hour drive, maybe a little bit longer with stops, but it was all, Interstate 81, straight south, right into Pennsylvania, and basically all the way into Tamaqua. Sorry, I might even be saying that a couple of different ways, but Pennsylvania, to where the Tough Like RORR race event was being held. So the drive was no issue. Customs was no issue. I'll post a little bit of that footage as well. It was pretty easy to get through. We hit it nice and early in the morning, so no issue. Maybe a 20-minute wait. And for those of you not tracking, it's a crazy weekend, both in Canada and in the U.S., because the way this weekend was, it was bookended by Canada Day on the 1st and obviously the 4th of July. And so crazy weekend to be traveling, crazy weekend to go across the border, but it was good. We didn't have any issues finding accommodations. So that part was all good. The bike, so the Beta 300. So I brought it down, finally got my suspension sorted out after a couple of, weird circumstances and events behind the rear shock, but all done by Stadium Suspension. I'm still super happy with where it is. Let the air out of your forks. One of the biggest lessons I've learned. I don't have bleeders on my forks. I don't think I'll put them on. But as one of my pre-ride checklists now is to let the air out of my forks. One, I couldn't believe how much pressure was built up in them. And two, I couldn't believe how much smoother and how much, cushier, how much more cushion they provided once I let the air out. So I had a couple of test runs around, and that was definitely a big thing. Set your sag. That's another one. Way too many riders don't set their sag. I finally did it. And when I say I finally did it, it's not that I had never done it before, but this was the first time that I really put the amount of effort into setting my sag and making sure that, my springs and everything are the correct weight for me. It makes a huge, huge difference. And don't go through, the process of paying to get your suspension done by a professional, because there's lots of people out there that know what they're doing when it comes to our bikes and when it comes to suspension, to get it back and not make sure that the sag is good to go. And when you get something back, make sure you check it. It's good to go. You put it on the bike, go for a ride, come back, check it over, check the torque, check to make sure, in my case, that the locking ring hadn't moved, or maybe it wasn't tightened properly when I got it back from the shop. I don't know for sure, but I know it would have been an easy fix to catch it early on as opposed to catching it in the middle of a race the way I did in Quebec. So check your stuff over, make sure you're good to go. I did quite a bit of maintenance on the Beta 300RR before I went down to Pennsylvania to make sure that it was all, all sorted, oil change and, tightening some bolts and torquing some stuff down, checking rad fluid, changing the oil, tightening gear shifters, making sure that, levers and everything were tight and lubed and the whole 9 yards. So make sure you do that stuff. Pays dividends when you get down there. So the Hard Enduro Series, Tough Like RORR. So really quickly for Tough Like RORR, there was 2 races on Saturday, a race, the last chance qualifier on Sunday morning, and then the main event. So from my own personal perspective, I went down with a few different Canadian guys, lots of different skill levels, but what I would argue was the deciding factor on this one was experience and maturity. Obviously, myself lacking a little bit in those areas when it comes to racing. So, just as a general point, when I lined up, and unfortunately I don't have the GoPro footage because I'll get to that in a second. When I lined up down there and the national anthem is playing and they're doing the prayer before the race and, the national anthem ends and, 100, 200 bikes fire up the engines and rev them out. It's an atmosphere that you don't get here in any of the Ontario or Quebec series for that matter. It's just an electric atmosphere is how I would put it. And it's really difficult to not get pumped up. You know, guys were walking the line, people I had never met before, obviously, you know, fist bumping all the way around. It was absolutely amazing. Again, I don't have any of that footage because unfortunately during the race, I lost my GoPro. So to Big Iron Moto, thanks for the GoPro. This video fully sponsored by Big Iron Moto. He sent me a GoPro 8 to use, and that's what this is being filmed on. So excitement, electric. You know, that flag gets waved, bikes are started, and you take off into the first corner. This is exactly how my experience went. I put my head down and I charged into that first qualifier the same way I would an Ontario XC or an FMSQ. I know from myself that when it comes to, you know, 2 hours plus in a saddle, that's a long time to sustain, and it's a long time to remain consistent and not make mistakes. So I knew this. I've had the experience for that. I didn't employ any of it tactfully. So I went into the first corner, head down, and I just started charging. B class again. So there's A and Pro on top of us who had already went. Listen, I definitely would not say, I wouldn't want to say too overconfidently that I was moving pretty good, I think, in the B class. If I ever get my footage back, if anybody in Pennsylvania ever finds my GoPro, you can keep the GoPro, send me the SD card. I'd love it. Love to have that back. But, I will post it because, I made a lot of really good passes. But again, I was charging and within the first mile or first 2 miles of, the 5 mile loop, and we had to do 2 for the first qualifier, I was starting to feel it already. And, I was rev bombing guys and we were going back and forth and I was getting into little battles with guys. And I let all of that get to my head, and it's no good. So what ended up happening was, I moved really well. I don't know where I was in the pack, obviously, but I definitely was not at the back, I don't believe, in the B class. I think I was probably about mid-pack, and I started on the 4th or 5th line of 15 riders. So that was pretty good, I think, to get up that far. Passed a lot of riders on the first climbs and into the first few rock gardens. Passed some of my buddies in there as well. But again, they were employing a bit of tact, and I was head down racing like I was in an XC. And so, I think you could probably see the common theme coming. Eventually, I took a fairly big spill. My chain guide, which I'm not going to show a picture of because it was a cheap one, I replaced it just before Tough Like RORR. It was a cheap one off of Amazon, and I will never do it again. I don't know if a more expensive name brand one would have held up to the hit, but this one certainly did not. So it took a hit. It was on a downhill, and I went down pretty hard on the left side. Really hard, actually. I was moving pretty fast, I would say, for the conditions for the trail. When I got my bike up, and you have to remember, this was hard single track. It opened up in areas, but where I'm talking about was definitely single track. It was already hard to get around guys, and I'm down on my bike, so I have guys piling up behind me. So the pressure's on. You don't want to be holding up people. There's guys sitting there, telling you to move your bike. So I get up, I try to slam it into gear, and I go to take off, and I hear the grinding sound. I shifted into a few different gears. This is how tired I was at this point already, right? So I went down hard. I'm getting up, I'm heavy breathing, I'm trying to pick up my bike. It's, kind of off camber, and, I can hear a grinding noise. So in my head, I'm thinking, my gears are gone. Why I thought that, I have no idea. I didn't even bother to check the chain initially. So when it wouldn't go, I got off it and I moved it. I had to basically pull it off to the side. And so I'm doing all this as fast as I possibly can because A, in my head, I'm losing time, and B, I don't want to be the guy holding up, a whole line of bikes. So I get my bike off to the side and I shut it down, and I basically sit down beside my bike going like, man, like as if this is how my race ends after driving 7 hours. And then I remembered something, and it was super interesting because I would never compare myself to a world-class pro. But I remember Big Iron Moto mentioning something about the mindset for guys who, when he went and did Erzberg Rodeo, and he talked about mindset, and he talked about how, you know, these pros, a lot of it is there is no option but to move forward. There's no option but to finish. You know, you know, if you have to knit a chain together on the trail, that's what you do. And, you know, case in point, you see Graham Jarvis pass, you know, 490 people or something like that at Erzberg Rodeo. Now, I'm not comparing myself to that, but I remember sitting on the side of the trail going like, okay, well, what's going on here? Like, it's obviously not my gears. And I look, and what I didn't notice was that the chain had fallen behind the sprocket because the hit was on the outside of the chain block, blew the chain block in towards the bike and pushed the chain off the sprocket on the inside. So the grinding sound I heard was it on my hub being pulled around as I was trying to get going. So I fought against the chain block. I didn't have any tools really to really fix it, nor could I. I mean, it was bent, you know, beyond, you know, the ability to fix it. But I fought through it. I got the chain back on the sprocket, but I'm breathing really heavy. I mean, I was in a bowl, so it was a big downhill followed immediately by an uphill, and that's where I went down, was kind of going into the bowl portion. So I'm in a bowl, you know, the bike's all messed up. I can't really move it frontwards or backwards without exerting a lot of effort, which is what I ended up having to do because I get the chain half on and then, you know, got to get the wheel rolling to get the chain the rest of the way on. I actually tried it by hand a few times, and finally I just put the chain on as much as I could, kicked it into gear, and spun the rear wheel, and I seated it. So, excuse me. So I got it seated. I'm back on the bike now, lost quite a bit of time, got passed by quite a few people. But now in my head, I go switch right back to race mentality, like right back immediately to put your head down and go hard. So what never crossed my mind throughout the entire first qualifying race was conserving energy, thinking about the second race that day. I was staying hydrated because I knew that was a weakness of mine in the past. So, you know, I was definitely staying hydrated, and I hydrated before. But listen, when it's 31 degrees without humidity, and, you know, I've ride in forests in Ontario a lot. The forest there was almost like jungle, like there was a canopy and it was just holding the humidity in, and it was going all weekend from like quick rain to super hot and humid. And it wasn't like in Ontario where the big storm goes through and then the humidity lets up for a few days. It was almost like the rain hitting the ground was just providing more moisture to get back into the air after the sun came out and it dried it out. So it was hot. And you know, it didn't have anything to do with not hydrating enough. It had to do with, you know, not being smart, pushing myself way too hard, you know, poor line choices, making silly mistakes on the trail. And like I said, overestimating maybe my skill, but definitely underestimating how hard the races were going to be. And so after I got done through there, I did make it again a little bit further up the trail. I don't know exactly how long at this point, but there was a climb towards the end of the first lap that you know, I tried to hit it. I tried to hit it twice. It was not something that would give me pause if I was riding in Calabogie, but I could feel my motor skills going. I could feel my equilibrium was just off. I do have quite a bit of medical training, so due to my job, so I knew that there was kind of something off. You know, the guys who were working the hill told me to turn around, go to the bottom, and try to take a run at it. I went to the bottom, looked at my bike, and put it up against a tree. I was in the States. You know, I have insurance, but I wasn't really looking for an excuse to go to an American hospital and fight with insurance. And one of the guys came down off the hill to come check on me, and I could tell, because I knew what he was doing by the types of questions he was asking me, that they were worried about me. So he was asking me questions like, where do you live? And, you know, very basic questions. And it's funny because I stayed in contact with him. Bruce, thanks a lot, man. Really appreciate your help. But he sent me a voice recording of him kind of joking around saying like, hey, where do you live? Ontario. And, you know, it was kind of funny because he's like, well, yeah, okay, Ontario's pretty big. Like, where in Ontario do you live? But it was interesting because while we were having our conversation on the side of the trail, I started to come out of it, and I was telling him, like, I know what you're doing. And he kind of looked at me and smiled. And I said, yeah, I know what you're doing, and I really appreciate it. So, I came out of it, which was really good. You know, he had water. Still had Gatorade. He gave me a little bar to eat and stuff like that. So I took it down. I made the decision at that point. I could have probably finished that lap on that qualifying race, but I made a decision at that point to go back to the trucks and cheer the rest of my buddies on and just make sure that they were good to go, which is what I did. But I definitely 100%, probably one of the first times in my life was experiencing some pretty legitimate heat exhaustion. And again, if I could go back in time, I would have had a completely different approach. Um, we have a motto in the riding group. Just keep moving forward, don't stop. I personally think for this hard enduro, I should have stopped more often. My buddy Chris and I had some discussions about it afterwards. There's absolutely no reason why throughout that qualifying race you couldn't have stopped and taking your helmet off to cool off and dump some water over your head or take a drink or just catch your breath. There was no reason why you couldn't do that. As a matter of fact, just surviving down there was not quite enough, but was the first step in actually making the last chance qualifier to begin with, because obviously my approach did not work. So yeah, I think that's my update. Sorry, during the crash I lost my GoPro, so I don't have any footage other than what I took on my phone and a little bit that I grabbed from the GoPro moving down that I transferred onto a laptop before the race just to clear the memory card. But Big Iron Moto, thanks a lot, man, for the GoPro 8. I hope to get some good footage with this. We obviously have some more events coming. Apologies, I had to switch memory cards on the GoPro. Still getting used to the GoPro 8 from Big Iron Moto there. So a couple things from my perspective. So three things. So the first one, back to basics. The second one, new revelations, as I'm calling it, strategy basically. But from a back to basics perspective, what I've found for myself and Moto Valley particularly is with all of the racing and commitment to those events, what I'm not doing is I'm not out doing my practicing, which is ultimately what allowed me to progress as quickly as I did initially when I started riding a couple of years ago. So that dedicated time to go and practice, back to basic stuff. Rich Larson, the IRC tire guy, has a great series on techniques for hard enduro. That type of stuff, you need to be putting in the work, you need to be putting in the time, and you need to be practicing. You need to be able to employ those techniques on the trails. So that's the first one. And I used to spend hours on log hops and playing on rocks and so on and so forth, and I've gotten away from that. And so the head down mentality of kind of charging through an XC race, a hare scramble as it were, is just not going to work in a hard enduro setting. Definitely not. The big one as well for those techniques is being able to employ them. This is a bit of a revelation, but being able to employ them in the middle of a gnarly section. It does not work to go ride Calabogie, Kawartha Lakes, or any of these other places and shoot up everything with momentum. That's great with the guys, and it's a lot of fun, and obviously you want to be able to do that. But one of the best things you could do from a training perspective is get yourself into situations where you don't make it up something, or you make it partway up something, or you have to start in the middle of a gnarly section. In these races, you are not keeping momentum the whole time. When you come around a corner and there's 8 riders piled up in front of you, it's just not going to work. They probably have all the lines covered. Everybody's tried everything to get around everybody else. There's white tape on both sides. You're not going anywhere. And so you're likely going to have to get yourself moving again, right there. So that's the big one. Back to basics. I mean, this is where I'm headed again for the rest of the summer until I get to some of the bigger events here. But back to basics, some training, so on and so forth. New revelations. So a couple of revelations. So the first one being what I just spoke about. By committing myself to events, I've been unable to get out and actually train and practice and work on skills. I think, I use the term dirty. So I've become a dirtier rider because in the XCs you can, in the off-road Ontario XCs and even some of the FMSQ stuff, like you can make it through with poor technique. You can sit on your seat, you can paddle your way through. You can even keep quite a bit of speed doing that. But when it comes to the hard enduros, you need to look at it through a slightly different lens. These are not the same races. They're not you can't employ the same approach. You have to be comfortable with your skill set. You have to be comfortable with your bike, which I'll get to in a second. But it's not the same thing. So another revelation that I had, and I just kind of spoke about it to a certain extent, but the approach, I'm going to talk strategy in a second, but just understanding that it's a different type of race, understanding that there is a different way to go about it, understanding that those of us who are comfortable riding in Ontario a lot of the times probably overestimate to a certain extent our skill, and we underestimate just how difficult hard enduro can be, at a national level in a series like AMA. They're not messing around. So, just understanding that. It's not to say not to go do it. There was a lot of did not finishes, but there was a lot of people who did finish. And some of the guys that came down with us that made it all the way into the last chance qualifier, one of the biggest things that they did was, and I'll talk strategy, but, they kept a cool head and they kept moving forward when they could, and they conserved energy and, just looked for opportunities to, get around bottlenecks when they could. But if they couldn't get around the bottleneck, they didn't lose their mind trying to get around the bottleneck, and they didn't lose their mind thinking, letting their mental game fall apart. So that was one of the big ones, right? Is it's really easy to get caught up in a race scenario and think like, oh my god, I'm losing so much time, what am I going to do? Not a big deal in these hard enduros. It's not speed's not going to win the race overall in general. Consistency, efficiency, the ability to make it through the sections is the harder sections. That's where you're going to make up the majority of your time. So that's a big one. Strategy for kind of the last one to understand here is strategy for your bike, strategy for your mental game, and strategy for your physical game. So for the bike, these are not races that you want to show up on a bike that hasn't been taken care of. Proper maintenance, bolts torqued, suspension sag, and all of that stuff fiddled with and played with, and that is going to work for you. Tires you're experienced with, half decent condition tires. Well worn in mooses, and traction aid devices, as I'll generally call them, whether that's a drilled out moose or, maybe it's a tubeless with half a moose combined, or whatever else you're using. But understanding, how much traction your bike has and what it can do for you. Understanding how your bike behaves in the heat. Is there any tuning that's required if you're still on a carbed bike, if there's going to be any elevation changes, that type of thing. You're running a fan, or you're not running a fan, or all your bolts torqued. Have you went through the bike? Are you comfortable with your bike? And is it reliable? And, put the best stuff on your bike that you can afford. is one of the big takeaways for me, because that chain guide literally cost me, I think, an amazing opportunity. Not that I'm convinced I would have made it much further, because I was pushing way too hard. But anyways, I digress. For your mental game, this is a big one, and it's the same theme throughout. It's not going to work. You can't go down to a weekend hard enduro race like this and think you're going to just put your head down and slam through a 2-hour race. Going at 90%. One of my buddies told me, and he got this from a pro, but like basically you should never be above 80%. And judging from my own personal experience now, I would actually argue 80%, is for the pro who's going to the main event. For me, I think that's like 60%. Survive the qualifiers, do as best I can, but understand that there is, a second qualifier that day. And chances are there was never a shot for me to make the top 50 and move to the main event. So even if I continued moving through the weekend, at minimum, that meant 3 races in that type of heat and terrain. So like the fact that I didn't do some sort of internal calculus is A, disappointing, but B, is what cost me the ability to move through that weekend and race some more and have to pull off the track early. So, understand that. And I think, like I said, for me, that's anywhere between 60 and 80% at any given time. And I think those 80% jaunts are, for the super tricky section that, needs some additional effort. But if you find yourself redlining, in the first couple miles of one of these hard enduro tracks, it is probably not going to go well. So, the racing mentality is important, but from my perspective, the way I should have looked at it was, I should have looked at it almost as an experience, an opportunity, and as a ride. And when I started to feel overwhelmed, I should have stopped, taken a break, drank some water, had something to eat, leveled myself out, and then continued on. So I think that's a big one from a mental perspective. I'm mentally strong enough. That's not the issue. You do have to be mentally strong, obviously, but I mean that's not the issue for most individuals who enjoy hard enduro. It's not that, but it's actually about being smart. There is a tactful way to approach a race like this. And then strategy for your physical well-being. You need to understand yourself. You need to understand the signs and symptoms of when you're pushing too hard. You need to understand, from a physical perspective, what you feel like when you feel good on the bike and what you feel like when you're feeling bad. You need to understand how much water you need to carry. Should you have food? Are you used to the heat? Are you not used to the heat? What are the different signs and symptoms? As well, from a physical perspective, when it comes to strategy as well, gear. So gear was a big one. Are you wearing, full armor? Are you accepting a little bit of risk to wear less armor to be able to cool off more? There was tons of individuals, obviously, not at the pro level when they're wearing all their sponsored kit and everything like that, but at the other levels where there was guys in there with t-shirts on, basically, or heavily modified, either heavily modified gear or no gear at all. And of course, those of us who have to go to work on Monday, maybe that's not always an option. I never ride without my knee braces, and I certainly wouldn't consider riding down there without things like my knee braces. But I would consider riding potentially without some of the upper body protection in the future in these races where you are literally crawling along. I think the bike stands way more of a chance of experiencing damage than the rider does. And like I said, my biggest threat was the heat, in my opinion. It wasn't the track, and it wasn't it wasn't me flying through the woods at 40 kilometers an hour hitting into a tree. We're not seeing those types of speeds by any stretch of the imagination. So, you know, understanding all of that, but it's having a strategy and like understanding it. And I totally went down there just, you know, with the same mentality as I would have going to Walton, Gopher Dunes, or, you know, Chloe's Kingdom, or what have you, or any of the FMSQ races. You can kind of throw your stuff in a truck and show up down there, and it's a great atmosphere, and you can do your thing, but it's not going to work for one of the hard enduros. So, anyways, those are a couple of things. You know, if you've listened to me talk for this long, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the support from a Moto Valley Enduro perspective. You know, I have another big event this season, at least one. You know, it's about refocusing here. So keep moving forward. You know, I'm disappointed in my Tough Like RORR experience, but I'm thankful because I think I'd learned something that's going to help me for bigger events in the future, and it's going to allow me to recalibrate and hit Tough Like RORR with a vengeance next year. So Tough Like RORR, I'm coming back. That's probably going to be a staple of my summer, I think, moving forward, because I think that's a race that can continue to provide challenges for me from now until the days I'm done riding, basically. So I'll be back. For everybody else, again, thanks a lot. You know, happy Canada Day for those of you, you know, obviously in Canada, but it's a little bit late. And happy 4th of July to my American friends. And Bruce, thanks a lot for your help and support on the side of the trail. Big Iron Moto, thanks a lot for the use of the camera. Glad I can keep making videos. Super pumped about it. And, you know, everybody else who supports the channel, thank you very much. So stay tuned, more to come. I think we're still in for some big things this summer, so more videos to come and less talking and more dirt bike footage. So that's what's important. So again, Moto Valley Enduro out here.